So, so Catherine, I guess this is kind of part of your work too. You are in part an educator. Mostly, you're an educator now. And for 31 years, you've been teaching a really interesting course that I don't think has really been taught in every school. So I think that your students are maybe uniquely set up to sort of know histories that are maybe represented here. We thought for the first time, but do you want to talk about, thinking about how to arm people to pursue leadership positions? How does your course contribute to that?
I think in a very important way. And I just want to say also for the audience too, how lucky we are to have these panelists and the groups that they represent, because they really are historically very important on the national and international scene. I know there's many other cities that have had groups of women in architecture, just say, and they've ebbed and flowed. And sometimes they've been very active, and sometimes they've not been active at all, and sometimes they just disappeared and or folded. But that never happened here in Chicago. Yeah. And I think one reason why, I've got a quick question for you before I address that, but could you talk briefly about how the officer leadership works?
I can talk about how it used to work.
Are you looking for a brand new slate of people every year, or just one, and then they rotate up?
You just kind of had to redesign that. I don't know if you were speaking to her specifically.
Well, both of you, because I think that, and the reason I'm asking that question is I think that that's perhaps somewhat fundamental to why some groups succeed and others fail. So how does it work in your group? How does it work in terms of becoming the officer?
Well, we have a board, so it's a non-for-profit, so everyone that volunteers all of the board are volunteers, and just people say, hey, I want to help out. What can I help out with? There's a lot of things they can help out with, and the more effort they put in, they start expressing like, hey, how can I do more? And then so we have this board. We have the main board, the treasurer, secretary, president, vice president, that sort of thing. And then we also have chairs. So we have the marketing chair, the website chair. And it's just people that have come to us and been like, hey, I really want to help you guys. You guys do awesome things. So it is sometimes hard because everyone's also working full time usually. Right. But just we all help each other. And I think that's the reason why things work. And I think we're all friends. I mean, most of the people I met at CWA, I met in CWA. And then we just became close. And they're like, hey, do you have an overwhelming workload? Like I can take some of that off for you. And it just kind of naturally progresses. But anyone's welcome to volunteer and become part of the board.
Sounds like that's a plug to the audience.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, it's part of my job.
Yeah. Do they still also, so when I was president, or around the time I was president, they instituted also that, you kind of burn out, especially after being president, because vice president used to historically do a ton they were kind of like pseudo programming chair. So it was a big lift to be the VP. And then, president was maybe slightly easier. But then they would burn out. And so we instituted, they had to sit on the board for the institutional knowledge for at least 2 years. So they didn't have to be really active, but they did have to come to the board meetings so that people would understand the context, so that, and because you become more efficient that way as well. So I'm not sure if you guys still do that or not. I guess that's my question to you, if that's still a piece to keep the continuity going.
Our board has been, it's like a year term, but whoever was the past president sits and she's kind of the liaison between the foundation and the board. And she kind of just lets us know of all this stuff. But yeah.
But so so that makes her still around.
Yeah. So I guess that's the only person that stays around. But everyone that's part of CWA, I feel like is, 10 years, 20 years. Nobody really leaves. I haven't really seen anyone say I'm leaving.
Does the presidency rotate up? I mean, were you a different officer before you became president besides
vice president?
Right.
Okay. That's important too. And how about in INOMA?
So in INOMA, it's a similar intention. So ideally, the person who sits as president-elect, you'd be elected to president-elect, and then the following term would be that you take on the presidency. And the idea is that the presidency is 2 years, but your second year as president, your president-elect is there. And so they're working kind of as your vice president, and then the next year that president-elect will move up. The president's around to kind of serve as a mentor, I suppose, and help you as you take over that position. But the idea is to just you're essentially electing every other year. It's the president and treasurer will move together always, and the president-elect and secretary will move together always. So in that way, that's ideally how it would go. I think with INOMA this year, we kind of saw like a new insurgence of leadership, and just due to different things happening with previous leadership, we just kind of had cold elections, and the whole board was brought in new this year. And so that left us with a bit of, okay, how do we learn from this? What are our pros and cons? And that's not to say we're not still supported by previous leadership. We definitely are able to go to them with questions, but it's been a balance between understanding the benefits of the connections and programming that exists in the organization previously, but then also looking from an organizational standpoint, how do we make this efficient so that it's something that people can kind of feed into, like a pipeline, which is funny because our biggest initiative is Project Pipeline.
To see over in this corner right here. And I love this sort of going into the minutia of organizational structures, because I'm pointing at Nick Wiley over here as a part of the co-prosperity spheres. This is the first of a series of programming called Togetherism, which is all about examining that the issue of collective action, or not issue, but the idea of collective action. And I love that as architects, we build structures, and here we're fine-tuning. You're talking about fine-tuning the structure of an enduring organization that can be flexible and responsive. And I think that's like, when people come to the show and want to see buildings on display, what we're really seeing is the architecture, like that kind of human architecture of collective action. So, yeah.
Well, and one reason I wanted to ask about the structure of the organization is because I think what happens, or what I understand has happened in places where these groups have petered out and never come back, people have burned out and they just don't feel like doing it anymore. Or a few people are doing a whole lot of work, and then the others are going along but not necessarily participating in the leadership roles. So if you have a situation where people are rotating up, and I realize it doesn't sound like what happened this year at INOMA, but maybe it has in the past. And certainly if you look at the national level, like the National Organization of Minority Architects, I think that's how it works. But you need a body of people who are committed to being involved in leadership role in the organization to continue doing it for a few years, and then one or two are replaced at a time. But it's harder if you have to run around finding everybody, and sometimes you can find then nobody, and then the group is gone. So I think whatever's worked here, it's really worked well. And so if it abides by that model 100% of the time, maybe isn't the issue, but you haven't had trouble finding people. And that's really important, finding people to lead the organization. So I guess back to the question that you asked me, Sarah, I do teach a course that I have taught now for just about 30 years, and a couple of the people in the audience are alumni of the course. I see a few in the audience, and I'm very grateful for you for being here, and you could probably comment on the course even better than I could, having taken it as students. It's the course that I offered was a new course called Gender and Race in Contemporary Architecture. And it's a seminar course. It's not a huge course by any means. Usually has anywhere from 10 to 20 students. Started out with one, and she just took an independent study, and I was devastated because I had prepared all this material and was all ready for the semester, and only one person came. So the next year we beefed it up and did more advertising, and from then on it was a lot easier. But the first time around was a bit of a letdown, in all honesty. But part of the class, we take a trip to Chicago. Again, our school is based in Champaign-Urbana, which those of you who don't know is about a 2.5-hour ride. Not the most interesting ride between here and there. Some of you can attest, but in any case, we do bring the students up here every year for a Chicago field trip, and we visit the offices of women architects and architects of color. Purposely, we try to seek out offices where they wouldn't be visiting with a regular architecture class. Because again, field trips are an important part of many studio courses, many other ones. So I've learned a lot from those trips that we've organized. And typically we'd also try to incorporate some of the leaders from Chicago Women in Architecture and INOMA if they're available to meet with us. So a couple of years ago when we came up here, we visited several offices, and then we had a nice lunch. And at the lunch we had the president of INOMA come, and also the president of CWA at the same time, and some other people, and they all got to meet the students got to meet everybody. It was just a win-win situation for everyone. So that's one small but very important part of the course. As I say, I'm on sabbatical this semester. I actually came here from California yesterday and will be leaving to go back shortly, but I came especially for this event and then going on to Pittsburgh to give a talk at Carnegie Mellon, courtesy of Sarah and colleagues. I regret that I do not have any students this semester because this would have been the perfect place for the field trip right here, because it's often an issue with where do we go and how do we pack in the day and how do we plan the route. So this would have been the southernmost point. Anyway, I'm hoping some of our students from University of Illinois will come on up and see it and enjoy it maybe next week for the reception as well. But that's just a tiny part of the course, but one of the most important parts of the course. And students have been exposed during that field trip to architects they wouldn't normally meet. And the architects meet the students, and it's just a win-win situation. They can say then when they're looking for jobs, if there's an opening there at some point, they might say, oh, I visited your office as part of the field trip. Usually the hosts very, very hospitable. Some of them have bought us lunch on a regular basis and showed us slides of their work and really wanted to get to know the students too. It was just a great opportunity. Also as part of the course, the students do have to read a lot. And much of the literature that they read is the background of what's represented here. So some of the historical, classical literature about how these organizations formed, why they were important, what were the challenges, the controversies that helped propel them into existence. And I do stress as part of the course how important this networking really is for the students, not only when they're students, but also when they get out there in practice. A lot of students don't have a clue how difficult it's going to be once they start working and how isolated they may in fact feel. So being aware of organizations like yours is really important. I feel like it's an important role that I play. And we have had some former students of mine who have gone on to leadership roles in your groups. And I feel proud that perhaps they were introduced to them through my course. Maybe they knew about them otherwise, but it's just a great opportunity for them to link. So again, a lot of other things go on in the course, but those are two that are particularly important.
Yeah, that's great, because I mean, a perennial question is like, well, why isn't there more diversity in the field? Well, maybe it's because there's not as much a diverse student base. That's not the case, and that hasn't been the case for a really long time. Right. So I think looking at that pipeline of women and minorities into the field, like where the drop-off points are that you were alluding to earlier, Susan, are there pinch points? How do we increase retention and strengthen connection? Yeah. But also, I'm sort of curious, something coming up, or a question that I have for you guys as, we're talking a little bit about history, but there's a little bit of a cyclical nature, right? There's like especially I think that was something that we kind of looked at in putting together this exhibition, this question of the same ideas coming up over and over again, or organizations appearing and then disappearing. Is it because the issues come and go, or is it that, the issue resolves itself? There's no more need for the organization? Is it because people, is it recessions? I know that in the case of Carrie, for example, that, an exhibition that you both attended, which I think is so cool. For those of you who don't know, this is an exhibition that you'll see in 1993 over here. It's an exhibition called More Than the Sum of Our Body Parts, organized by a group called the Carriatas, which stands for Chicks in Architecture Refuse to Yield to Atavistic Thinking in Design and Society. It's a crazy acronym, and it got me totally interested in this topic. It's like, chicks in architecture? I learned about that recently, and I thought, why had I never heard about that? And when we talked to those, thanks to Susan's article, actually.
Yeah, it's in my,